Have you ever felt fear grip you so tightly that you couldn't breathe? Have you ever laid awake at night, staring at the ceiling, while your heart raced with thoughts of everything that could go wrong? What if I fail? What if I lose everything? What if I'm not strong enough? What if tomorrow never gets better? Fear is a silent killer. It steals dreams. It paralyzes decisions. It whispers lies into your soul until you believe you are powerless. Fear doesn't just live in haunted houses or horror movies. It lives in bank accounts that are running dry, in medical reports that carry words we don't want to hear, in marriages that feel like they're falling apart, and in the quiet loneliness of someone who feels unseen, unheard, and unwanted. Fear is everywhere, and in America today, it's at an all-time high. People are drowning in anxiety, depression, and uncertainty. The news is filled with chaos. The economy feels unstable. Families are breaking under pressure. And maybe you feel it too. Maybe right now, you're fighting battles that no one else can see. Maybe your smile hides the storm inside your chest. But here's the truth you need to hear. Fear doesn't have the final word. Fear is loud, but it isn't lasting. And there's a shift, a powerful shift that can change everything. That shift is faith. Faith is not blind hope. Faith is not pretending everything is fine when it's not. Faith is the weapon that tears down the prison walls built by fear. Faith is the bridge that carries you from the valley of despair to the mountain of courage. Faith is the voice that says, "Peace, be still," even when the storm is raging and you feel like your boat is about to sink. Imagine for a moment what your life would look like if fear didn't control you. Imagine waking up with courage instead of dread. Imagine making decisions with confidence instead of hesitation. Imagine knowing deep in your soul that no matter what tomorrow brings, you are not alone. Fear shrinks your world, but faith expands it. Fear chains you to the ground, but faith lifts you higher than you thought possible. And yet so many of us never experience this shift because we believe the lie that fear is stronger than us. We let it settle in our minds until it becomes our master. But the truth is this: fear only has the power you give it, and faith only needs the smallest opening to break through. Like light piercing the darkness. Faith is the shift that changes everything. So let's break it down. Let's talk about how fear works, why it holds us hostage, and how faith unlocks the doors fear tries so hard to keep shut. The first thing we need to understand is this: fear is natural, but it was never meant to be your home. Fear is an alarm system, not a prison guard. It was designed to alert you, not enslave you. But many of us confuse the warning bell with a life sentence, and we stay stuck in cycles of panic. Fear grows louder when you feed it, when you replay every worst-case scenario in your mind, when you scroll through news headlines designed to terrify, when you let your imagination paint pictures of failure instead of possibilities. Fear feeds on repetition, and the more you give it, the bigger it becomes. But faith works the same way, except in the opposite direction. Faith grows when you feed it. When you remind yourself of past victories, when you focus on promises instead of problems, when you choose to trust instead of tremble, when you dare to believe that God is bigger than whatever is in front of you. Fear says, look at the storm. Faith says, look at the one who calms storms. Fear says, you are not enough. Faith says, My strength is made perfect in your weakness. Fear says, tomorrow will crush you. Faith says, tomorrow is already in God's hands. The moment you start to see this difference, everything changes, because fear thrives on focus. If you focus on fear, you get more fear. If you focus on faith, you get more faith. So ask yourself right now, what have you been feeding? What have you been focusing on? Has your mind been playing fear's soundtrack or faith's symphony? Because the one you listen to the most will shape the life you live. Fear tells you you will never escape. Faith tells you freedom is already yours. Fear tells you your story is over. Faith tells you your story has just begun. And here's the shocking part. Most people in America today are walking around believing fear is normal, that anxiety is just the price of living in this generation, that hopelessness is the standard. But that is a lie. We were never created to live chained to fear. We were created to walk by faith, to stand in courage, to rise in boldness, and to live with peace that doesn't make sense to the world. This is not some distant idea. This is real. It's the powerful shift that can literally change everything about how you think, how you move, how you live. And once you catch it, once you taste what it feels like to live free from fear, you will never want to go back again. Fear is a master of disguise. It dresses itself up in logic, in caution, even in what looks like wisdom. It tells you, I'm just trying to protect you, but in reality, it is shrinking you. It is convincing you to play small. It is robbing you of opportunities that God Himself placed in your path. How many times have you said no to something because fear whispered, what if you fail? How many dreams have died in your heart because fear said, you're not qualified? How many relationships never even started because fear said, they'll just reject you anyway? Fear looks safe, but it's really sabotage. And the tragic truth is, millions of people live their entire lives under its spell. They never take the leap, they never start the business, they never speak their truth, they never step into the calling that was written on their soul, because fear chained them at the starting line. But here's the question, what happens when faith walks in? Faith doesn't ignore the fear. Faith stares fear in the face and says, you don't get the final say. Faith says, I know the storm is real, but so is the one who walks on water. Faith says, yes, I feel weak, but my God is strong. Faith doesn't deny reality. It declares a greater reality above it. And here's where the shift happens. When you start to live by faith, you stop measuring your future by the size of your fear, and you start measuring it by the size of your God. That's when ordinary people start doing extraordinary things. Faith has turned addicts into leaders. It has turned cowards into warriors. It has turned broken homes into restored families. And it can do the same for you. Maybe you're listening right now and fear has been crushing you. Maybe it has you cornered in your finances. Maybe it has you sleepless at night. Maybe it has you paralyzed about the future. But hear me, faith is not just for pastors or saints in history books. Faith is for you. It's for ordinary people who wake up every morning and wonder if they can make it through another day. Faith is for single mothers holding families together. Faith is for fathers who feel like they failed. Faith is for young people drowning in anxiety about the future. Faith is for anyone who is sick and tired of living chained to fear. Faith is the invitation out of the prison. It's the key that has been in your hand all along. Let me tell you a story. There was once a man who was terrified of public speaking. The thought of standing in front of a crowd made his knees shake and his voice tremble. But deep inside, he knew he was called to share his story. One day, he made a decision. He said, "Fear, you may come with me, but you will not control me." He walked up to the stage, heart pounding, sweat pouring, and he opened his mouth and spoke. And something powerful happened. The fear was still there, but faith was louder. That moment became the start of a journey that impacted thousands of lives. What changed? Not the size of the fear, but the presence of faith. You see, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward in spite of fear. And faith is what gives you that courage. It doesn't always remove the storm, but it teaches you how to walk through it without being destroyed by it. Fear says, "You're on your own." Faith says, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Fear says, "You're drowning." Faith says, "I will lift you up with my righteous right hand." Fear says, "It's too late." Faith says, "I make all things new." And that message hits hard in America right now because so many people feel like it's too late. Too late to fix the marriage. Too late to heal the wound. Too late to chase the dream. Too late to turn around. But faith interrupts that thought and says, as long as you're breathing, God is not finished with you. As long as there is breath in your lungs, there is hope for your future. And here's what makes faith so powerful. It's contagious. When one person dares to believe, it sparks faith in the people around them. When a father chooses faith, his children catch it. When a leader chooses faith, his community catches it. When a nation chooses faith, history is changed. But the opposite is true too. Fear is contagious. When one person lives in fear, they spread it to others like wildfire. And that's what we're seeing today, fear spreading faster than truth. But the antidote is still the same. Faith is the cure. Faith is the shift that silences the chaos. And here's the twist. Faith doesn't even have to be huge. The Bible says even faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. Think about that. You don't need to have it all together. You don't need to have perfect confidence. You just need a spark, a flicker, a whisper of trust. And that tiny seed of faith has the power to topple giants. So if fear has been screaming in your ear, telling you you'll never break free, I'm here to tell you even the smallest act of faith can change everything. It could be as simple as saying, "God, I can't, but I believe you can." It could be as small as taking the first step instead of waiting until you feel ready. It could be choosing to show up one more day when you feel like quitting. That's how faith grows. One step at a time, one decision at a time, one prayer at a time. And before you know it, the fear that once felt like a giant now looks small compared to the faith that has taken root inside you. Faith doesn't mean the journey will be easy, but it means you won't walk it alone. And that changes everything. So, what does life actually look like when faith begins to overcome fear? It looks like freedom. Freedom from the constant weight pressing on your chest. Freedom from the endless what-ifs that circle in your mind. Freedom from the chains that kept you small for so long. It doesn't mean you never feel afraid again. It means fear no longer dictates your decisions. You start to live differently. You walk with a new confidence that people around you notice. They ask, "What changed?" And you know, deep down, it was the shift. Faith is not just a religious word. It is a way of life. It is a lens that changes how you see the world. When fear sees obstacles, faith sees opportunities. When fear says, "It's impossible," faith says, "With God, all things are possible." When fear says, "Stay where you are, it's safer," faith says, "Step out of the boat and watch the impossible happen." And here's the most amazing part. Once you taste this freedom, you can't keep it to yourself. You start inspiring others without even trying, because your courage becomes a beacon of light in a dark world. Let me paint a picture. Imagine a woman who has lived years under the shadow of fear. She never spoke up at work. She never pursued her passion. She always felt like she wasn't enough. But then she discovers faith. She begins to whisper prayers. She dares to believe she's not alone. And slowly but surely, she starts making different choices. She raises her hand in meetings. She takes the leap to start the business she has dreamed about for years. She begins to live boldly. And before long, her friends, her coworkers, her children notice something has changed. She is no longer chained by fear. She is walking in freedom. That is the ripple effect of faith. Or picture a man who grew up hearing he would never amount to anything. Fear told him those lies every single day until he believed them. But one moment of faith changed his story. He heard the words, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you," and something clicked inside. He started to see himself differently. He began to believe he had a purpose. And with every step of faith, the chains of fear fell off, one by one. Today, he leads others with strength and courage. His past no longer defines him. His fear no longer controls him. This is what faith does. It rewrites the story. Fear said, "You're broken." Faith says, "You are being restored." Fear said, "You're finished." Faith says, "Your best days are still ahead." Fear said, "You're weak." Faith says, "You are strong in me." Fear said, "You're alone." Faith says, "I am with you always." And this isn't just theory. This is reality. All around the world, people are finding out that fear doesn't have to be the boss anymore, because faith has already defeated it. And maybe right now, you feel like you're standing on the edge of something big. You feel fear pulling you back, whispering, "Stay safe. Don't risk it. Don't believe." But faith is calling you forward. Faith is saying, take the step. You don't need the whole map, just take the next step. Faith is saying, you're stronger than you know, because the one who made you is walking with you. Faith is saying, the breakthrough you've been praying for is closer than you think. And here's the shocking thing. Most people give up just before the breakthrough. They let fear talk them out of the promise. They quit too early. They walk away when they were one prayer away, one decision away, one act of courage away from seeing everything change. I don't want that to be your story. You don't have to give fear the driver's seat anymore. You don't have to let it make the choices that shape your life. Faith is ready to rise up in you, if you let it. You may not feel ready, you may not feel brave, but courage doesn't come first. Faith comes first, and courage follows. And when you take that step, you will realize fear was nothing more than a shadow. It looked big, but it had no substance. Faith shines light on it, and suddenly, what once looked like a giant shrinks into nothing. So what would your life look like if you truly lived by faith instead of fear? How different would your relationships be? How different would your career be? How different would your health, your peace, your joy be if faith was the loudest voice in your life? Imagine living without the panic, without the paralysis, without the constant replay of worst-case scenarios. Imagine sleeping peacefully at night because you know tomorrow is held in bigger hands than yours. Imagine facing challenges head-on, not because you're fearless, because your faith is greater than your fear.
That's the life that is possible, and it's waiting for you to step into it today. Faith is not just about heaven one day. It is about how you live right here, right now. It is about walking in freedom, in courage, in strength, in love. It is about choosing every day to silence fear and listen to the voice that says, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you always."
So here we are, at the end of this journey. And the question now is not whether fear is real. We all know it's real. The question is, will you continue to let it define you, or will you make the shift that changes everything? Fear has robbed you long enough. It has stolen your peace, your sleep, your joy, your confidence, your future. But it doesn't have to steal one more day. The power to overcome fear is not locked away in some unreachable place. It's already within your grasp. That power is faith. Faith is not complicated. It is not reserved for the perfect. It is not something you have to earn. It is a gift, and it is waiting for you to open it right now. Think about the story of your life. Do you want fear to be the headline, or do you want faith to write the chapters ahead? Fear writes stories of regret. Faith writes stories of redemption. Fear leaves you empty. Faith fills you with purpose. Fear chains you to the past. Faith launches you into the future. And here's the shocking truth. The choice is yours. You don't have to wait for the perfect moment. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take one step of faith today. And that step could be the beginning of the greatest shift you've ever experienced. Maybe it's the step of forgiveness you've been avoiding. Maybe it's the step of courage to launch the dream you've been hiding. Maybe it's the step of trust to hand over the fear you've been carrying for years. Whatever it is, today is the day to choose faith over fear. Don't let the voices of doubt convince you to delay, because every day you delay, fear wins another round. And you were never meant to live defeated. You were meant to live victorious. You were created to rise above the shadows and to walk in the light of courage and peace that faith provides. So I challenge you right now, ask yourself, what would my life look like if I let faith lead instead of fear? How different would my story be? And then make the decision to step into that story starting today. Because faith is not just an idea. Faith is action. It is the bridge between where you are and where you were meant to be. And once you start walking on that bridge, you will look back and realize fear was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Faith was always the real substance. Faith was always the power waiting to set you free. And America needs people like you, people who refuse to bow to fear, people who dare to believe in hope again, people who choose to stand when the world tells them to fall. Because when you rise in faith, you give others permission to rise too. When you live free from fear, you become living proof that another way is possible. And that proof is powerful. It spreads, it multiplies, it changes families, communities, even nations. So don't wait, don't hesitate. Make the shift today. Let this be the moment you look back on and say, that was the day everything changed. That was the day I stopped letting fear write my story and I started living by faith. And let me tell you something, when you make that choice, you will discover a strength you didn't know you had. You will find a peace that doesn't make sense to the world. You will walk in a joy that fear can never steal. And you will live a life that inspires others to do the same. This is not the end. It is the beginning, because overcoming fear through faith is the powerful shift that changes everything.